Hi everyone, Cephany Shotano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this brand new Charli XCX album, Crash. This is a new LP from UK pop singer and songwriter Charli XCX. Her follow-up to a set of records that certainly showed her at a hyper-pop peak, the fantastic 2019 album Charli, which was my record of the year that year, and that was very quickly followed up by How I'm Feeling Now in 2020, which was very much Charli's cooped up pandemic lockdown LP. There were many artists dropping these kinds of albums around this point, and Charli certainly had one of the better offerings in that realm, really turning lemons into lemonade with a lot of aggressive left field production. Now fast forward to the fall of 2021, and Charli begins the promo cycle for this new LP. The opening singles forecast a project that may be a more straightforward pop experience, possibly with an 80s twist, thinking of songs like Good Ones or New Shapes. But then tracks like Baby and Beg For You dashed any hopes of this being simply an 80s endeavor. Really right up to the release date, the overall direction of Crash remained a little unclear. All that was clear is Crash was definitely going to be a departure from the Vroom Vroom Pop 2 Charli era that, in my opinion, has resulted in her best output so far. Now, of course, this had some fans shaken and a little critical, something Charli seemed to acknowledge in a short departure from social media that she announced on Twitter recently, as well as in her attempts to pitch some of these new tracks to fans. Now, I'm certainly not going to come on here and directly tell Charli XCX what to do with her career and her music because, you know, it's for her to make that decision, not me. But, of course, I am free to question the way that this is being framed here, and while the numbers for Good Ones and Beg For You are good, tens of millions of streams collectively, they're not 2, 3, 4-fold over the streaming numbers that Charli did good. I mean, maybe that could be the case down the road, time will tell. But I guess what I'm getting at here is Charli's last couple of records haven't exactly relegated her to obscurity, and on top of it, aren't there already numerous gateway drugs to Charli's more avant-garde catalog? She does have some of the biggest pop features in mainstream music of the last 10 years, also Boom Clap, the song 1999 as well. That track has done over 500,000 in sales worldwide. None of this is to invalidate Charli's wishes or desires to put out an album that commercially does really well. All I'm saying is that I would hope that Crash has more artistic purpose to it, other than to be an on-ramp for listeners who, if they heard the Vroom Vroom EP, they might hit skip. Either way here, Charli has set expectations for a milder project with a more agreeable approach, maybe. And in some respects, I guess that's what Crash is. The lead singles, in my opinion, have only lost more and more flavor since I originally heard them. Good Ones, for example, the rhythm section on this one sounds like a pumped-up knockoff of New Order's Blue Monday. The vocal performance is fine, mostly, but the verses just kind of come off like a placeholder to just lull us into a low expectation point, just so the hook hits a little bit harder when it eventually comes in. And for some reason I can't help but shake like this is Charli attempting a Rihanna S&M type moment here with this anthemic cut, but there's something missing here, just not giving it that wow factor. The song New Shapes, by comparison, is certainly more grand in its presentation of just huge drums and bright blaring synth chords. The showy vocal performances from Caroline Polachek and Christine and the Queens are certainly something too. It feels huge, but no matter how many times I listen to it, I just can't commit that much of it to memory. The song just does not resonate to me as catchy. Plus, the foghorn chorus is just super unpleasant to listen to. What you want? I ain't gotta. I like that the song Beg For You hits with a nice two-step groove. That's a sweet change of pace. Plus, I've been dying to hear Rena and Charli on a track together for a while now. But is this Charli's best showing lyrically? Far from it. And the dime a dozen dance pop synth layers don't inspire much excitement either. Baby is still to me a neat little synth funk number with massive sub bass hits. Feels like a legit refreshing take on an old school formula. This is one of the moments on the LP where Charli is throwing it back to the 80s a little, but simultaneously it still feels modern. I wanted to be more excited going into this project, but I just couldn't be based on what I was hearing. All I could do was cross my fingers and hope that the deep cuts were 5 times better. But sadly, that did not end up being the case. The opening track here headache. We have more blaring, gated, 80s style drums hitting some really sloppy fills. A truly awful synth and guitar solo at the finish, too. In a way, I do think the sound of the song ties into the lyrics effectively, as it does kind of feel like Charli is, against my will, pulling me into a car that she is then crashing at 80 miles an hour into a wall, no brakes. Deeper into the record, we have the song Lightning, which I am still trying to make heads or tails of. First, how do we have another backing beat that is so obviously pulled from one of the most popular New Order songs, Bizarre Love Triangle? On top of this, Charli and her producers toss on loads of kooky synthesizers and sound effects, at one point even some classical guitar. And toward the end, we get all of these disorienting beat switch-ups and weird little vocal manipulations, the kind of stuff I've heard incorporated on Charli's more left-field projects previously, but in this instance, it just sounds like a mess. Like her and everyone are just throwing in whatever they feel like randomly with no regard as to how the overall track sounds at the end of it. Tracks like Constant Repeat as well as Move Me are a little bit more what I was expecting from Crash to begin with. Very modern pop cuts that are a much easier listen, not a whole lot of bells or whistles. The chorus on Move Me has what's easily one of the better vocal performances on the project too, but simultaneously the production and songwriting on these tracks just doesn't feel bright and colorful or fun in the way that much of Charli's songs have been over the past several years. They're groovy, they're listenable, but the risk is low, and as a result, the reward is too. From here, the final moments of the LP bring a couple of funny highlights. There's Every Rule, which is a very spotlit, low-key ballad, mostly built on vocals and some very simple synth arpeggios. Very cinematic, feels like something straight out of a rom-com movie scene, but still sweet and intimate in the way that Charli is laying out this story about a blossoming love that she's kind of crossing over the threshold into. Then the song Yuck is a straight-up piece of 90s disco pop, unlike aesthetically anything else on the record, which isn't really a bad thing. Maybe we'd be having a different review right now if we were talking about a Charli album of a very smooth, groovy throwbacks with nimble bass lines and very sassy choruses. Used to Know Me is then a super dated piece of Eurohouse. I mean, I'm not saying the sound is unsalvageable and that it has no room in the current dance music paradigm in terms of influence. It absolutely does, but I feel like Charli brought this vibe back without really dusting it off. The whole thing sounds the way I think ill-fitting vintage clothing looks. Then finally the song Twice leaves the record on some interesting parting thoughts, really the impermanence of some of the things that we tend to build our entire lives around, like relationships, etc., with Charli then encouraging listeners to don't think twice, live your life, do what feels right. And while that mantra does stick in my head, I'm sad to say the rest of this record doesn't. I am feeling a light to decent 5 on this one. Transition, have you given this record a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like, please subscribe, and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Charli XCX, forever.